crowds of Israeli arrive at Rosh Hayan, north of Tel Aviv, for the opening of a pipeline to bring water to the Negev Desert.
In one of the world's harshest deserts, Israel carved thousands of kilometers of canals and built a technological wonder that transforms seawater into life. This is how they did the impossible. But before we reveal how Israel turned the Mediterranean Sea into drinking water for an entire nation, hit the subscribe button if you're interested in more mega projects news like this. The Immortal Desert. The Negev Desert covers more than half of Israel's total land area, and it stretches across the southern portion of the country like a huge, unforgiving wasteland. For centuries, it was considered essentially uninhabitable because it is a place where its summer temperature regularly exceeds 110 degrees Fahrenheit. The rain falls only for a few scattered weeks each year, and the cracked earth seemed to actively reject any attempt at cultivation. There are underground aquifers that have sustained small populations for generations, and even they are now drying up. Agriculture, which forms the cultural and economic backbone of Israel as a nation, also stood on the brink of collapse in these regions. Families have survived on water hauled by trucks from distant sources. Just living life in a place like that is hell. The contrast is almost cruel, because just a dozen miles away from the Mediterranean Sea, they are living in a vast and endless area filled with billions and billions of liters of water that nobody could ever drink. But thanks to this huge challenge, and the geographic irony it sparked, what would become one of the boldest engineering gambles in modern-day history? What if Israel could pull the sea inland, deep into the heart of the desert? What if technology could strip salt and turn seawater into drinking water? In 2000, Israel formally approved the National Water Carrier Expansion Project with an investment of almost $3 billion. They weren't planning to pipe a little bit of water across the country. They were going to challenge the desert itself, forcing the rivers to flow throughout and making the land habitable and stronger. But this isn't an easy feat, and we are going to cover everything you need to know from start to end. The master plan.
מפעל של 130 קילומטר מהצפון, מהכנרת ועד הדרום, הוא מסוגל להעביר 450 מיליון קוב מים בשנה. זה המפעל שהביא לפריחת הנגב, הביא מים.
Before even a single drop of water could be channeled, engineering faced a huge problem: how to build an infrastructure so massive on ground that literally shifts beneath your feet. Desert sand isn't a stable construction material, and it moves with the wind, collapses under weight, and even absorbs moisture unpredictably, destroying buildings as a whole. The first phase required transforming hundreds of miles of harsh, barren desert into a workable construction site. This project began with technology that would have seemed like science fiction just decades earlier. Firstly, high-resolution satellite imagery mapped every dune and depression across the whole route. Then the ground-penetrating radar also revealed that the geological layers were hidden beneath the surface. Thousands of wind measurements have identified patterns in sandstorms that could bury construction sites overnight. Survey teams have spent months and years living in the desert of Negev, drilling hundreds of boreholes, some exceeding 100 feet deep, to study the composition and stability of the overall ground. Every route marker was also placed by hand and recorded with centimeter-level GPS accuracy. It's safe to say there has already been so much money spent on this mega project. Hundreds of bulldozers were also deployed across the construction zone like an army. Their mission was to flatten the dune, cut down the high ridges, and redistribute sand into the lower areas to make the whole land smoother and workable. Then each section was carefully leveled under stress and strict supervision. Surveyors even checked the elevation and slope constantly, ensuring that there is stability across miles of open desert. Then there were conveyor systems that pushed the sand away from active work zones, while compactors pressed down the top layer, creating a beautiful, firm foundation. However, leveling here wasn't enough, because there was loose sand even when it was flattened. Engineers even discovered that the controlled moisture injections could create a denser and more cohesive layer. So by using long sprinkler arms and underground pipes, they sprayed precisely measured amounts of groundwater across the construction site, which allowed moisture to go many inches deep. Moreover, once the sand reached optimal dampness, heavy rollers moved in. These machines usually weigh dozens of tons, and they repeatedly pass over the moistened surface, pressing down the land and flattening it to the point where it becomes permanent. After the surface was dried under the relentless desert sun, it hardened into a workable foundation. What had been a worthless shifting terrain became one of the largest construction sites in the world. The riverbed.
From the river to the sea, water a necessity. Fresh, desalinated water from the Mediterranean to refill the Sea of Galilee.
After the foundation was prepared, the excavation process began, and the scale was absolutely shocking. Every single day, construction crews remove approximately 70,000 tons of sand and soil from the Negev Desert. To put things into perspective, that is roughly the weight of around 700 fully loaded Boeing 747 aircraft that are being dug out and moved away every 24 hours, day after day, for months and years. The construction corridor even stretched nearly 250 miles and required over 1,200 engineers, operators, and laborers working in rotating shifts. Daytime temperatures, as we know, in the desert exceeded 115 degrees Fahrenheit, turning the construction zone into a literal living hell. In other words, it became too hot to touch with bare hands, and workers had to constantly combat heat exhaustion and dehydration. The canal, designed for a wide U-shaped profile, was approximately 150 feet across at the base, with an average depth of 23 feet. Most of the excavated sand was ultimately reused to build embankments along both sides of the canal, forming levees 10 to 16 feet high. Then comes the process of sealing the riverbed, which was an attempt to prevent the desert from draining the canal dry. Excavating was just the start of the Battle of the Negev, and the Negev Desert's defining characteristics are its thirst, and it's very deadly. It can absorb any exposed water within hours. In desert sand, it acts like a huge sponge. Without its proper sealing, it would take away all the water, no matter how much there is. To counter that, developers had to seal the riverbed. Here, the canal bed and slopes were carefully moistened and leveled with a 2-inch layer of fine sand. This created a smooth wave for the waterproofing layers that would come. Then they added concrete, which was included in thick panels of concrete approximately 4 to 5 inches deep. They were poured in many manageable sections that ultimately measured 16 feet. But even after pouring concrete in the desert, it still had unique challenges. For example, temperature fluctuations would cause random expansion and contraction that would crack the concrete slab. Engineers also addressed this by adding something called expansion joints between H-panels. These gaps were filled with hot bitumen sealant. Altogether, more than 220 miles of canal were lined with this multi-layer waterproofing system, making it one of the largest with such an installation that was ever created in the Middle East.
הרבה יותר צלולים. זה המדד שמפעל הסינון נמדד על פיו. אנחנו מקבלים.
But then came the biggest challenge of them all, which was desert winds. Thanks to desert winds, sand moves a lot, and without proper protection, the canal embankments would gradually be affected or even become covered by the moving sand dunes. Here, engineers addressed this by planting vetiver grass and desert acacia along the slopes. This was such a marvelous construction because if we look from the satellites of aircraft, the completed canal looked like a silver ribbon cutting across the sea of gold. Finally, the support infrastructure was built, and it featured multiple steel gates that could be raised or lowered to control the overall flow rates with otherworldly precision. At this point, everything was working in such harmony that no one expected it. The first flow. After more than 15 years of hard work and construction, years of surveying, excavating, lining, and building the supporting infrastructure, the entire system finally came into being and the testing phase began. The engineer opened the intake gates gradually, which let water flow section by section. They started in small quantities, increasing discharge from 500 to 2,000 and then to 6,000 cubic meters per hour. Along the entire route, the tactical team inspected every point, measuring pressure and carefully managing the whole system. When the first surge of water flowed through the dry canal bed, water that had been nothing but cracked earth for millennia, water reached the place that had been nothing but cracked earth for several hundred years. Locals began calling the day the desert came back to life. Wherever the water reached, cheers followed, and people were getting happy. The national water carrier, which began its construction in 1953, took over 11 years to complete at a cost of a whopping 420 million Israeli lira, which is equivalent to hundreds of millions of dollars today. This system could transport up to 72,000 cubic meters of water per hour. That's enough to fill an Olympic swimming pool every 2 minutes continuously day and night. But the main benefit of this water was that it was bringing fresh water from the north, all the way down to the Negev Desert. However, even after spending so much money and building structures that almost seemed impossible for humans, there was another issue that needed to be addressed: transforming seawater. Because here's the thing, much of the water now flowing through the Israel Canal network didn't come directly from natural freshwater sources. It came from the Mediterranean Sea, and the seawater, of course, isn't drinkable. The salt concentration that made seawater unfit for human consumption or agriculture must be removed through a process known as desalination. This process was quite hard and difficult to integrate, especially at such a large scale. Today, Israel operates some of the world's largest and most advanced desalination facilities, with plants like Sorek, Adara, and Ashkelon producing hundreds of millions of cubic meters of fresh water. End of video. And how did they manage to do it? Well, the first stage started with the pre-treatment, where large debris, seaweed, and marine organisms are filtered out through finer screens. But pre-treatment only removes the physical contaminant because still water still carries countless fine particles, microscopic organisms, and dissolved substances that are not seen with the eyes. This then became the foundation of the technology called reverse osmosis. This process reverses the natural process by applying huge amounts of pressure. In simple terms, the water becomes easily drinkable, ready to sustain millions of people and irrigate vast agricultural lands. Today, if you look at this desert today, it seems more... The satellite imagery reveals the transformation dramatically. There's a long green ribbon winding across the golden desert, visible from space. This green artery of Israel connects north and south, representing not just the border infrastructure, but also the artificial lifeline that has made modern-day Israel possible. The transformation extended far beyond agriculture. Villages that were slowly dying came to life and expanded to the point where more people started living there. High-tech agriculture facilities, greenhouses with climate control, hydroponic systems, and advanced soil management systems all rose from the sand, turning Israel into a global leader in desert agriculture technology. Israel's transformation of the Negev Desert from barren wasteland into a self-sustaining, thriving agricultural region represents one of the most ambitious engineering projects in modern-day history. What do you think about this mega project? Tell us in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel and ring the bell icon for more.